All right, guys, welcome back to our GMP discussion, and this is where we left off. And we were talking about, what happens if a company are they have a violation or they have many violations as far as GMP regulations go. And these were some of the outcomes that happen from that. We said the FD 483 form is actually a summary form of what they found and what needs to be addressed. And then, depending on the response to that form and the action on behalf of the company to that form, then other things can follow suit. And those are everything from additional inspections from auditors to warning letters to product recalls, pulling the license so they can't produce or manufacture that product anymore, contacting clients, contacting customers, trying to lower their revenue that they have throughout the business in order to financially bankrupt them, and even put them into a court setting with lawyers and judges, and possibly incarcerating some of the managers or administrators or owners or workers of that particular company. So they can pretty much do anything that they want to do, but they can't physically make them shut their doors and close them up. That's just the nature of it. But there's always ways around the red tape. And believe me, the auditors know how to work around the red tape. So GMP, we talked about kind of how this got created, and we mentioned this jungle book that was written that people read and just took offense to based on the information that was shared in it. We also talked about a few different things that led up to the FD&C Act, about the products that were getting released to the market that consumers were purchased. And here are additional ones, right? I mean, these stories never really stop. They continue to happen. So here in 2012, we have New England Compounding Center, NECC, and a meningitis outbreak happened in Q4 in 2012. That outbreak killed 64 people. Again, it was due to a product that was getting released, and that product was pushed out onto the market. Consumers purchased it, used it, and ended up dying because of it. Notice here down below, a few years later, so 2012, it took until 2018, but in 2018, 11 former owners, executives, and employees of the New England Compounding Center was actually convicted of federal criminal charges. So this was one of those cases where it did go to court, and the judge ruled and the jury ruled against those companies on the manufacturing line. And they charged those employees with murder and manslaughter, knowing that they were producing a product that did not uphold quality standards or the CISPQ standards. And because of that, it was very clear what they were doing. They pushed out a product to market that ended up killing many people, 64 people, just because of their neglect and producing a product that did not conform to standards. Next up, Pakistan drugs, more than 200 deaths after taking contaminated heart medication in 2012, and Benvenue Labs in Ohio, problems of physical and microbiological contamination led to a consent decree. So basically, the company owned up to it, and they said, yes, this was our fault, this was our problem, it's all on us, absolutely, we agree to your findings, we're not going to fight it, keep us out of the court. But eventually, a little bit later, they did go bankrupt in Q4 of 2013. So that company did not survive, but again, that was due to the manufacturing and the shoddiness that was going on the manufacturing line. These companies that are in violation of GMP, I like to say there's 4 areas here that an auditor would look at. So when you do get audited, and it will happen, when those auditors come on site, they're going to ask and they're going to review 4 major core things. The first one is what we would call the corporate documents. The second is the quality management system. The third are the refresher trainings. And the fourth are actually additional audits. So I want to talk about these just for a few minutes, just to kind of give attention to them, because these are areas that the auditors will look at, and that means they're very important for a company as far as GMP goes. So let's talk about corporate documents first. Corporate documents, these auditors are going to sit down and they're going to ask for a number of different pieces of paperwork. The quality manual, of course, that includes your standard operating procedures, all of the policies that go on in-house. What are people following? The rules and regulations inside of the company while people are working within the four walls of the company building. What goes on? How is it structured? What's the training like? That's happening with the corporate documents. And that's something that can get violated very easily if the bookkeeping and the tracking is not being upkept like it should be. So auditors are going to take a look and request those areas. You might as well have them ready. And that also includes an auditor can bring you in and maybe question you if you're not careful. So what do you do? Do you understand your job? How was the onboarding process when you were hired? Did they give you proper training when you were hired? When they gave you this task, did they train you properly on the task? Do you fully understand why you're doing the steps that you're doing when you do this task? Could you explain some of that information to us? So they do tap into some of the workforce in order to gather this information. Number 2 is the quality management system, and this is our QA and our QC department. So part of good manufacturing practices should be quality checked, and those quality checks are going to happen internally. And though the QA and the QC, those people that are involved in those areas, they're going to visit them, of course. They're going to ask them questions. They're going to review about what their job is, how do they do their job, how do they file the paperwork? What do they look for? They're really going to take and dissect the QA QC department as much as possible, because their job is to keep the company in check, whether it's on the laboratory side of the house or the manufacturing side of the house. They're going to keep those employees in those areas in check, and QA and QC has a very big role to fill because of that. Number 3, the auditors are also going to look at all of the training that takes place at the company, whether it is a new hire and how those people get onboarded. If they are working in the manufacturing area, well, what kind of manufacturing training did you provide them? And notice here it says GMP, so current good manufacturing practices. So we want to make sure that we put a system in place that when people are hired to do the manufacturing type of job, they fully understand the consequences of them not doing their job the proper way. So every year they have to have a refresher. This gives a chance for new employees to hear the information again. It gives the chance for people that have worked there for 20 years to hear the information again. There's no excuse. I didn't know that. There's no excuse for that. And it also gives a chance for the company to share any of the current modifications that have been done on the GMP side of the house. So these are the new regulations. These are the new things in the pipeline. This is what we need to get ready for. We're going to meet once a year. We're going to talk about this. We're going to kind of make a plan on how to address these things, so that way we are going to be ready next year when these get implemented. That's the purpose of the annual trainings, and they are required, and they should be happening at these companies that manufacture a product. Finally, the last area that auditors will look for is the actual audits themselves. So all of the QA and QC reporting, the documentation, the findings, everything that goes on with internal audits, they're going to take a look at and they're going to scrutinize. So the internal auditing is very important. A company should have a plan. A company should have their own internal auditors that kind of do that job and make sure everyone's in check. But it goes above and beyond that as well. So what you're seeing here are things called measurable quality metrics. So what passes and what fails? How do you constantly monitor that? And what's the plan in place if something does fail? The regulatory inspections. So yeah, there's regulatory issues that have to happen. We have to abide by the federal government and the regulations that they kind of enforce. So what system is in place that checks off that we are doing these things, instead of waiting to the last minute for one of those regulators to come in and say, no, you weren't doing any of these things. So they want to make sure that they are actually addressing those issues as well. And finally, client audits. So these are the customers that are paying this company that you work for money, and sometimes big money, in order to do a job. So as part of that agreement, there are certain tests that have to be done, certain things that have to be upheld, as far as the reporting, the laboratory, the findings, both on the laboratory side and the manufacturing side of the house. They want to take a look at these clients. Who are they? What type of communication do you have with them? And are they getting what they basically have paid for? So 4 areas mainly that these auditors are going to look at. Finally, or one of the final things that I'll say about GMP is that auditors are required to come around regularly, no matter what. So if you are prime and pristine and you are manufacturing a product, and that manufacturing is like the model template of what everybody should be doing, it does not matter. You're still going to get audited. And that's just the way that it is. So number one, there are routine audits. They're going to happen. There's no way around them. They're going to show up, and they're going to show up on a certain date and a certain time. And they're going to do what auditors do. They're going to go around. They're going to look at every area of the business. So the laboratory spaces, the manufacturing spaces, and the facilities. And they're going to bring with them typically a group of people that will scatter out and do different tasks or look for different things. There is a form called a 482, and the 482 is the acknowledgement that you are on the list. That's what this is. So it is the notice of intent to inspect. So these auditors, if they're coming from the FDA, will provide the company a 482, and they'll say, listen, we're going to show up this year. We're not going to let you know when, but you are on our list of site locations that we have to check. And we will be there and we will see you, but they're not going to give you an exact date, and they're not going to give you an exact time. And the reason for that is because they don't want the company to preempt their visit and get everything all nice, clean, and tidy before they show up, because that is not representation of what a normal working day is going to be like. So that makes sense. I wouldn't want it otherwise if I was a consumer, because I would want them to be surprised. I'm here. Now let's take a look at everything that's going on. So that's going to be the number one type of inspection that GMP is going to see, as well as GLP, really. Number 2, for cause. So if they get a alert, or if they get a tip that is made by maybe a current employee, or maybe a prior employee, or maybe just someone that's related to the product in some form or fashion, then the GMP auditors can come on site and take a look at the facility. And that can happen in the same year as a 482. It doesn't matter. But this is what they would call a for-cause visit. So something has tipped them off, and we have now suspicion that something is happening on the GMP side of the house that needs to be looked at a little bit closer. This often falls into the criminal division of the FDA. So that means that something maybe is so bad that a tip or trick has been shared with an auditor for them to be acknowledged of it, and they can come on site and see what's actually going on. Is there something to it or not? And yes, it can be a disgruntled worker. That does not matter. So if you're really mad and angry at your supervisors or the owner of the company, and you know good and well things are not following GMP, you are more than willing or capable of contacting the FDA and saying, this is who I am, this is what's going on, it is not GMP approved, and you need to come down and put a stop to it. They are not supposed to release the information of the worker if they're currently employed. That is kept secret, but they can at least say that it is a tip that has been provided from someone that is currently working at the company, right? Disgruntled workers that have been fired, Absolutely. They can call the FDA up as well, and they can say, listen, I no longer work there, but these are the things that I have seen. These are the things that I knew was wrong, and you need to go down there and you need to put a stop to it. Number three is a third type of auditing visit, and that auditing visit is what we call a pre-approval inspection. So if the company, let's say, wants to make a new product, before they are approved to make that product, they have to be visited by an auditor, and they have to get the okay for production to start. So what happens is that the facility is built and all the equipment is brought in. Maybe the workers are trained, maybe they're not quite yet, but all of the bones are there on the manufacturing side. So when an auditor comes in, they can take an auditor through the process of the manufacturing. So they can say, listen, this is where we receive our materials. This is where they're held. Now, this is where the blending and stuff is going to take place, and the mixing or whatever the case that goes on. This is where the product is actually made and formed. This is where that product is going to be packaged, put into a box, a foil packet, something, I don't care, or a bottle. And this is where those finished product inside of the boxes are finished product. This is where it's going to get stored until we ship it off or until we send it to market. That's just one of the things that goes on. So an auditor gets an idea of the flow of the process, and then they can follow up that with that company and say, listen, these are the red flags that we saw. These things need to be fixed before you're released to be okay and before manufacturing can start. Or they will send a letter and say, yeah, everything looked good. We didn't see any major problems at all. So as far as we're concerned, we are okay if you want to start production, if you want to start manufacturing. So pre-approval inspection is another reason that an auditor will show up at a company location and begin to question and inspect everything that goes on. Finally, the FDA inspections. This is just really a summary of everything that we've talked about so far. It has a 6-system approach. That's what we call that. So on the manufacturing side of the house, they are going to look for materials that make that product. They're going to look at the production line to make sure that everything is in place that needs to be in place. They're going to look at your packaging, your boxes, your bottles, whatever you're putting that product in. They're going to be inspecting the packaging and the labels that go onto those containers. They're going to be looking at the facilities, and they're going to be looking at your equipment. The facilities, again, are going to be the buildings, the rooms, construction, water, electricity, all of the things that you would think that a company should put as a priority in making a manufacturing plant. Those are the things they're going to be looking at. As far as the equipment goes, equipment will not only be analytical scientific equipment, but anything that comes in contact with that product as well. That is also deemed equipment, and that also needs to be inspected, and a plan needs to be put in place to make sure that this equipment is maintained and that we troubleshoot it and that we fix those problems when they happen. Finally, the next kind of go hand in hand in a way. The laboratory and analytical controls, anything that's got to be tested laboratory-wise, data-wise, purity-wise, and a lot of that does go on with the production of a food, cosmetic, or a drug product, as you can imagine. That laboratory also has to be inspected, and the equipment within that laboratory also has to be inspected as well. So, for instance, you could see a GMP manufacturing plant here, and this manufacturing plant is making a product. So, ingredients go in and ingredients go out. And then off the side of this plant, there could be a dedicated laboratory space. And that laboratory space will be looking at the ingredients and the product that happens in that area. And they can do some of the preliminary testing. They might not do all of it, but they can do a lot of it. And they can generate these reports. And it kind of where it's nearby, it keeps everyone in check and everyone talks to each other. But there could also be a completely separate laboratory space within the company. And that laboratory space could be doing more than just that product. They could be testing a whole lot of different kinds of things, right? But this workforce maybe is a little bit bigger. The lab spaces are larger. There's more sophisticated equipment in this area. And that laboratory space can serve as a platform for the company to do some of the testing with, right? So you can see adjacent labs to the manufacturing plant, and you can also see disconnected labs from the manufacturing areas as well that can also do some of the more sophisticated tests for those products. So that's what laboratory and analytical control is going to be about. And then finally, the quality system. So I've already mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again, but the QA and the QC department will both focus on audits, heavy audits, because that is an area that auditors love to spend some time in, because these people need to keep everyone in check. The laboratory staff in check, the manufacturing people in check, and everyone else from top to bottom that make that company work. So QA and QC is going to be hit hard, and that is going to be an area that auditors are going to really focus on. All right. So that concludes this first portion of what this lecture module is all about. And this is GMP. So the manufacturing side of a company, because that could be where we work. There's science behind this manufacturing side, right? Or the laboratory spaces that are connected to the manufacturing side. And all the things that they've got to go through for audits and regulations, everything leading all the way back to the FD&C Act. And now you know a little bit about that. So in the second half of this lecture module, we're going to be focusing on good laboratory practices. And the good laboratory practices side of the house will not be focused on production, but all of the testing that goes on in a lab environment. That's where a lot of the same kind of information is going to be coming from. A lot of this is going to be a review, but we're going to touch base with it again because it is important, and that's what this class is all about. So GMP, have fun with the GMP assignment. Have fun reading the Jungle excerpt and answering those questions, and maybe any other weird little manufacturing problem that we begin to have that I would like to share with you as far as case studies would go. So you'll find an area for that with in the online platform. Just do them by the due date, and we're good to go. So next up is going to be the second half, and that's GLP. So now would be a great time to take a break, do some studying, and then pick up the GLP side when you get GMP finished. And I'll see you then.